With the signings of Brandon Nimmo, David Robertson, and Kodai Senga, the New York Mets have blown past the highest luxury tax threshold, the Steve Cohen tax, and now have the most expensive team in MLB history. How much longer will they operate with this type of a payroll? Does Steve Cohen just not care anymore? Is he done playing nice with the other owners? We're discussing all of that on today's edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, it's no secret that Steve Cohen is the richest owner in baseball, one of the richest people on this planet. And really, maybe even the richest owner in professional sports altogether. We always knew that the Mets would have the potential to be the Yankees of old and just outspend everybody. But it was a little bit of a slow burn for Steve Cohen to get there. And let's really take this thing back. There was no guarantee that Steve Cohen was going to be able to purchase the New York Mets, and to get that approved from the other owners, a boys club in themselves there who, I don't want to just throw the word collude out there, but, they operate a business together, the 30 owners. And to welcome somebody into their club, it has to pass a 23 out of 30 vote, and there was a time where we weren't sure if Steve Cohen would pass that vote. Now, ultimately, they decided that Steve Cohen was good enough for baseball and was the right thing for the Mets, that they did not turn him down. And I think that Steve Cohen, for a little bit, respected the other owners enough to not just jump right in head first and spend like crazy. And the Mets were not a luxury tax team in Steve Cohen's first year of ownership. Now, that served multiple purposes. For one, they appeased themselves to other teams. Yes, he made a trade for Francisco Lindor and extended him to the richest contract ever given to a shortstop, $341 million. Yes, they went out and they made some other, free agent splashes. A James McCann. You like that deal now? No, you don't. But they made some moves, and they did increase payroll, but not past that first threshold. So they were not a luxury tax team. 2022, change of scenery. Okay, they do decide to go over that tax, and they ended up with a payroll of $294 million when it comes to luxury tax. The threshold was at $230, so $64 million over. According to that, they would have exceeded the Steve Cohen tax line. Then again, this is from Spot Track, and I don't know exactly how accurate to the dollar that is, if Cohen did pay that much in luxury tax this past season. But regardless, the Mets became a luxury tax offender, and that is important to note because every single year you're a man in the tax, the more you are penalized. But Steve Cohen last year, he did increase payroll and started to make some waves, but you also had so much dead money still on the books, which still exists this year with Robinson Cano. But they made moves, they made signings, but they didn't really blow everyone out of the water. Scherzer was a big deal. Obviously, Marte was a significant contract, but none of those other contracts were really that crazy. I think the Kodai Senga signing was a turn for this franchise. Senga and Nimmo kind of combined, because those are two players that the entire market wanted. Brandon Nimmo was the top outfielder left. Kodai Senga, you could make an argument that he was the top free agent starter, either him or Chris Bassett. There was a lot of teams who were meeting with Kodai Senga, and that was their main priority of the offseason, to sign Kodai Senga. There was a lot of teams meeting Brandon Nimmo, and their prime target for the offseason was Nimmo. The Mets get both of them, and this is the beginning of a turn for the Mets where Steve Cohen is really becoming that big bad wolf on the block, and the Mets are not just breaking the luxury tax threshold of $233 million. That's cake work for him. No. You look at the Steve Cohen line of now 293. Well, currently the Mets are clearly going to have a payroll north of 330. Most people are estimating around 335 right now. That's with no other additions. And that is also $85 million more than the New York Yankees. If the math that John Becker of Fangraphs does was spot on, this is from an article they had. They said if his math is correct, the Mets are currently set up to pay $414,997,666 in real payroll and tax penalties next season. So Steve Cohen will be paying, not quite, but damn near $500 million for you to enjoy Mets baseball next season. It's remarkable. Now, that also sets up roughly $80 million in tax penalties, which is currently higher than 12 teams' active payroll. That's penalties that he's paying. I mean, I don't even take the time to do the math, but add those 12 teams together, it's not even going to snit to 330. I don't think. Maybe it'll snit to 330, but maybe not to 415. He might be spending more in total payroll than maybe the bottom third of the league combined. Steve Cohen this offseason has done exactly what he said he was going to do. This guy, I love him for many, many reasons, but what he is really doing here is he is going out and he is putting his money where his mouth is, literally. And he said if you're going to blow past that top tier threshold, and you know what I just said with the Mets being at 294, maybe they did come in just below it last year. And imagine that when you're really handling the cap, money could have moved around in enough ways that they were able to get under it. Now, if this is the first year they've exceeded that top tax line, as he said, if you're going to blow way by it, the Mets are about $40 million past it. Steve Cohen's not playing nice anymore. Steve Cohen is going out. He's looking at what his team needs. And he's saying, I don't want to hurt my long-term prospects. I don't want to trade guys that could be great value contracts moving forward to enhance the current roster. So as much as the Mets are all in, you don't want to trade a player like Brett Beatty, who you have 6 years of control of, cheap, to get whatever player, if it's Alek Thomas in center field. So instead, they signed Brandon Nimmo. You don't want to trade Francisco Alvarez to get a Sean Murphy, like the Braves just did by trading William Contreras in a 3-team trade to get Murphy over. The Mets are focusing short-term with spending so that they can build long-term into the future. That has always been the mission. But in the process, if you're a team that wanted Kodai Senga for all it's worth, and that was your main target, and then Billy Epler gets you up on the phone and says, hey, what's your interest in taking James McCann's contract? You're not going to get cooperation from a lot of teams. So this is also a self-fulfilling prophecy where the more you spend, the harder it is to trade anyway. But Steve Cohen does not care anymore. The New York Mets are now the big bad wolf on the block that can spend, and put themselves in an incredible position to win now, which is what every Mets fan wants. But I think the beautiful thing about their spending this year is they're not spending dumb. And that's what I want to talk about next. Because while they have this team that is supremely expensive, you compare it to what they could have been here, right? And the money that could be out there. I think all of these signings make sense. And you look towards the future and you can maybe understand when the Mets are going to try to get back under that luxury tax line again. We'll discuss all of that in just a minute. Before we do, though, today's episode is brought to you by SimpliSafe. At Locked On Mets, we believe home should be where you and your family feel safest, especially over the holidays. This season, give yourself and your family a gift of peace and protection with the #1 rated home security system, and that is SimpliSafe. Right now, SimpliSafe is offering our listeners 40% off a new security system, and don't put this off because you never know when an emergency can happen, and with SimpliSafe, they have 24/7 professional monitoring agents who use Fast Protect technology to capture critical evidence and verify that a threat is real, so you can get the highest priority police response. SimpliSafe is a whole home security with advanced sensors for every room, window, and door, HD security cameras for inside and out, with smarter ways to detect motion that alerts you only when a threat is real, and even hazard sensors that detect fires, floods, and other threats to your home. 24/7 professional monitoring service costs under $1 a day, which is less than half the price of a traditional home security system. Don't miss your chance to save big on my favorite security system. Get 40% off any new system at simplisafe.com/lockedonmlb. That's simplisafe.com/lockedonmlb. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. While the New York Mets are spending like crazy right now, their spending has not been crazy, if that makes sense. Yes, it's a lot of money. But if we just look at deal by deal what they did not pay over market value for nearly anyone. Did they pay maybe more than market value for Justin Verlander? Was there another team that was going to give him $43.33 million? We don't know. But they set the market themselves last year with Scherzer. If you're going to sign one of the best pitchers in baseball, a perennial Cy Young candidate, to a short-term contract, now that is the bar you have to reach. So, yes, were the Mets maybe the only team that was going to offer that contract? Possibly. But it was not over market value, and it was a short-term deal if we compare what they did altogether to what they would have had to do to retain their team. Well, suddenly it makes more sense. Not to mention, I saw somebody tweet this out today. Look at the combined payroll from this past year's rotation, which was Scherzer, DeGrom, Bassett, Taijuan Walker, and Cookie Carrasco. $128.3 million. Upcoming season, Scherzer, Verlander, Senga, Quintana, Carrasco, $128.6 million. So about the same money was allocated. Now, how do you have a team with such a great payroll in comparison to the one this last year? Well, Edwin Diaz is making more money, Brandon Nimmo's making more money, and you get a David Robertson in there who's making $10 million. That's how you get to a lot more money than what you spent this past year, even if your rotation is costing about an identical rate. Now, break this down further. To get Verlander, Senga, and Quintana on the books for next season cost the Mets $71 million. Jacob deGrom, Chris Bassett, and Taijuan Walker are making a combined $76 million this upcoming season. Total value given out: Verlander, Senga, Quintana, $187 million. Jacob deGrom alone, $185 million. So if you tell me now with hindsight, you could have either had Jacob deGrom for 5 years with a 6-year option, or you could have 2 years of both Verlander and Quintana and 5 years of Kodai Senga, it's kind of hard to pass up what the Mets ultimately did here. Now, if you combine in the $135 million that Bassett and Walker are getting, you are looking at a payroll or total allocation of resources over the life of those deals that is far greater than what the Mets ultimately spent here by grabbing the 3 pitchers they did. Also, I failed to mention this entire time, which shame on me if you haven't seen the news. Bassett did sign. He signed with the Toronto Blue Jays. I never mentioned that. So he's making $21 million this season, 3-year, $63 million deal. Now, compare that to Kodai Senga, who has an out that after the 3rd year. It's either $63 million for Bassett or $45 million for Senga over 3 years. And you compare the $101 million of Senga and Quintana to Bassett and Walker at $135, that's a steal. And you go even further, compare Verlander to deGrom. Verlander, 2-year deal, 3rd-year option based on health. deGrom, 5-year, $185 million contract with a 6-year option based on health. So you sort of throw the options out, the 2-year deal versus a 5-year deal. The Mets are in great shape. And look, as much as you can call Verlander a risk in himself, of being a 40-year-old pitcher. It's a guy that outside of Tommy John has been about as durable as anyone in baseball, and there's no reason to think that he can't do that again. So you look at what they got there, and yeah, I think DeGrom, his ceiling is higher for sure. And in the playoffs, I'd certainly like a healthy Jacob DeGrom over anyone else on the planet. But for this team, that signing made a lot of sense. They don't bring back Chris Bassett. They instead bring in Kodai Senga. As I just said, 3 years, $63 million. Senga, 5 years, $75 million. Opt out. Senga has a higher ceiling. Bassett obviously has the higher floor. But you get a high floor starter in Jose Quintana that sort of absolves you of that a little bit. Quintana, 2 years, 26. Taijuan Walker to bring him back 4 years, 72. Even further, I saw a lot of people when Taijuan got that contract who said the Mets should have given him the qualifying offer. I like 2 years of Jose Quintana at 26, a hell of a lot more than I would have liked 1 year at 19.56 for Taijuan Walker. Quintana was a much better pitcher this year. He has a little bit of a longer track record of success, although he has a more recent track record of failure where he struggled for a while. But I think he broke through that this year. So altogether, you look at each contract by contract. Again, there's really not any overpay outside of meeting the market value, as I already said, on Verlander. And the other one is giving Brandon Nimmo 8 years. I don't know if another team was going to do that, but Nimmo was your own guy, and you get him back at a lower AAV than you would have had you actually signed him to his market value, which I do believe would have stretched out to potentially $25 million if instead of it being an 8-year deal, it's a 5 or a 6-year deal. Again, all of this is to say the Mets, while they have spent a crazy amount of money, their spending itself has not been crazy. It's been well thought out. It's been meticulous. And they have put together a team that can win big this year, but into the future is not going to hurt them. And that's where we're going to close the show. I want to discuss what the future payroll looks like and also how will the rest of teams in Major League Baseball react to what Steve Cohen has done. We're going to get to that in a minute. But first, today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for your sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. They've got it all at BetOnline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. BetOnline is always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Right now, the Mets are plus 900 to win the World Series. Only two teams who are favored more. The Astros at plus 600, the Dodgers at plus 750. You want to place a bet on the Mets to win it all today? Head to the website or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action. Bet online, where the game starts. So with all of this spending we've seen from the Mets, they have still kept everything into a relatively short window. It's this year and next year. That's what they're looking at. They are going to blow through the tax the next 2 years. Robinson Cano will come off the books next season. Mark Cannon and Eduardo Escobar could be off as well, although the Mets hold club options on both of them. If you combine Scherzer, Verlander, Lindor, Marte, Nimmo, Diaz, Quintana, and Senga, as well as James McCann, you're already looking at $215 million. That's not including Pete Alonso and Jeff McNeil's final year of arbitration, which could get expensive, assuming the Mets don't sign into a contract extension sooner. And that is also including all the other arbitration guys you might have, different signings you might make. When you put all of that into the payroll beyond that $215 million, the Mets are going to blow past the luxury tax again and likely past the Steve Cohen threshold. Bottom line, though, that is year 4 of Steve Cohen's tenure as the Mets owner. He wants to win a World Series in the first 5 years, so he's really trying to win it in the next 2. Then you go to 2025, the final year of his 5-year window. You got Justin Verlander, if he picks up or if he exceeds the $140 million and gets his option, that's $35 million. You got Lindor at 34.1, Marte at 20.75, Nimmo at 20.5, Diaz with deferrals at 14.4, and Senga at 15. Right now, With Alonzo and McNeil not on the books by then being free agents, Spotrac has their payroll just under $130 million when it comes to the luxury tax. Now let's just say McNeil and Alonzo are extended for $40 million a season between the two of them, which would probably be like a $25 million for Alonzo, $15 million for McNeil. All of a sudden you're at $170. The luxury tax threshold will be $241. If over the next 2 years the New York Mets win a World Series, they could take the opportunity in 2025 to bring back spending a little bit, get under that $241 million threshold, reset their penalties, and try to become a sustainable franchise. Also, you can imagine if Verlander comes off the books, well, now that 170 we're talking about drops down to 135, and you really still have $100 million to spend while remaining under the threshold. So that's the first time where the Mets might get under it. And what Steve Cohen will probably do as he continues to own the team is there'll be years where he'll go low over, and then you always want to reset every once in a while and get right under that line to, reset all of those penalties that come your way. So for now, next 2 years, expect ridiculous payrolls, and the Mets could still add. 2025, that's the first year we could see the Mets bring the spending back down a little bit, and the more that they sustain, the more guys they develop to be stars, the more contract extensions they give out that are team friendly, the more this thing can become this machine that just wins and wins and wins without having to have Steve Cohen foot a $400 and damn near $20 bill every single season on total payroll with penalties. So that is where we are. Steve Cohen is not playing around. He's not playing nice with these guys anymore. He wants to win. He has made that very clear since he first took over the team, but now he's showing it. And that's what you see when he goes out, no F's given, and gets a Brandon Nimmo to an 8-year deal. Gets Kodai Senga aboard, even though they already have 5 quality starters. Signs a David Robertson early in the offseason at $10 million to get an additional closer type to help Edwin Diaz and make his life a little bit easier. It's a beautiful thing, and this is still just kind of the beginning of what everyone hopes is a dynasty that Steve Cohen can build here. I'm not saying that dynasty has begun just yet, but that's where they're trying to trend here, and you certainly feel way better about the Mets' prospects of winning consistently than I think we ever have, at least in my lifetime. But that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. Throughout the rest of the week, we already have some of these shows planned out for you. I am actually going through a marathon recording session tonight because I'm going to be going out of town on Wednesday. So I'm going to bank some episodes so your content continues through Friday. Tomorrow's show will be about who the perfect final piece is to juice up this offense. What is the power bat the Mets should add? Thursday, building off of that, is it okay to ride Daniel Vogelback as the DH, or do the Mets have to trade him and look in another direction? Then we'll close out on Friday with the Farm Report. I have Arm Layton coming on, great prospect analyst for us at Just Baseball, and he is going to dive all into the contributors the Mets will have on the 2023 roster when it comes to prospects: Francisco Alvarez, Brett Beatty, potentially Mark Vientos, as well as the Rule 5 pickup, Zach Green. Again, though, that's going to be all. Make sure you follow, rate, and review. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day, not for your second listen. Check out Locked On Sports Today, hosted by Peter Bukowski. Locked On Sports Today is where you want to go to stay up to date with everything going on around sports. You can find Locked On Sports Today on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts.